Welcome to Coffee and the Bull.
He doesn't share his stuff.
Two-way street.
And this is for the listeners. You can't complain that nobody ever asks you, what's going on or how you doing. If when they do ask you what's going on and how you doing,
Right.
you don't link up with them.
Right.
Hey, I'm good, man, and then roll out or
Right.
change the subject to talk about Minecraft or whatever it
Right.
is.
And look, for the significant other listeners, and that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to genderize it. For our significant others that listen, and regardless of what side of that spectrum you're on, you've got to remember, no matter who that person is to you, whether they're a significant other, whether they're a friend, whatever, the moment you weaponize that openness, you've done the lowest thing you could ever do. You've damaged them to a point they can't come back.
And that's just because of our profession. We get called to a lot of people's houses. They're going it's they're on the brink of divorce or they're going through divorce, and adults can be downright nasty to each other, to the people they had the beach weddings with. That we're pledging our life together.
Right.
And you look and you're like, how did you go from, hey, this is a person I want to spend my life with, this is my soulmate, to I hope they die.
Right.
And like, I don't understand it, and I haven't been through that, so I'm only speaking on the outside, but it's across the board.
Yeah.
And so I see, and I'm not saying all husbands are bad. I'm not saying all wives are bad, in the divorces, but at times like that, that's when it gets weaponized. So it's
so quickly.
Hey, you opened up about this, or you talked about this story or that story or whatever, and it turns around and gets thrown in your face, or it gets thrown on the Facebook. And so now the guy's got to deal with that, or even when guys are crappy, the wives have got to deal with it. Having to explain to their friends that, hey, they had a psychotic episode or whatever, because they were stressed out and they made statements and they tried to keep it under wraps, because you don't want your neighbors knowing what's going on. You don't want you don't want all of your friends to know everything that's going on in your life. I get that. That's human nature.
Right.
But it gets thrown out so blatantly without regard, because you're like, hey, I'm done with you. So now I'm just going to throw it out there, and you deal with it. I hope your life is horrible.
Right.
And I'm like, how does that work? I just don't understand it. But then at the same time, what I noticed, I don't have the same conversations with my wife that I have with you, or that I have with Luke, one of my other really, really, really good friends. Where, like, I know that, and I don't have the same conversations between you two.
Right.
And so, like, I'll call him, or honestly, he calls me a lot of the time. And he's like, hey, man, where you at? What do you got going on? Because he knows everything that's going on in my life. And I'll have moments with him where, it might be 2 a.m, sitting in the recliner crying on the phone or whatever, and I'm not going to have that with, I just don't do it with my wife. And it's not, it's not that I don't value her opinion or whatever, but I also don't want her to look at me as being weak. And that's a standard guy approach to things,
Well, and we've also tied that connection in too, that it's walks of life,
right?
And I can respect where Luke comes from. He's a very respected individual, and I know that he's a member of your church and everything else like that. Whereas I'm not. Mm-hmm. That's not the. I say this respectfully to Mr. Luke. Luke's not the guy you call at 2 a.m. to get rid of something that you should get rid of.
Right.
Right. I am, like, my truck or yours.
Right.
I got shovels. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's where we've gotten to the point of maturity in our lives. And I'm not going to say we're very mature, but we're mature enough to know that there are things that we can address with each other, and the nitty-gritty of life. And there's things that need a different touch that Luke's going to have based on our paths in life. And my son, I love him to death. He's 8 years old, and he tells me all the time, whenever he gets angry about stuff, and I tell him to sit down, calm down, like, don't get angry. There's no reason to get angry, and he says, well, I'm just so mad I want to fight, and I'm like, no, you don't. I promise, no, you don't. And he's like, no, you don't understand, Dad. I get so angry. I want to explode. And I'm like, okay, that's normal. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with that. I was like, but you got to remember, every time you explode, you have no idea what's on the other side of that explosion and how big their explosion is going to be.
Consequences.
Right. You know? And so, we've had the self-defense. We've had the, when it's okay to be angry and when it's okay to use force and not use force and everything else. And I realized this morning, having a conversation, because he's getting agitated with his little sister, like most big brothers do. And I looked at him and I said, babe, you don't want to go through the life like Daddy did. You don't want to know the majority of your adult life, all you've done is fight. That's it. And I'm not glorifying anything. I'm not saying that, all I did was operator level stuff or anything stupid like that.
Right.
But my whole life has been geared around violence of action. Mm-hmm. And so when you have to turn that off in those time frames to go with a softer touch to be husband or father, that's difficult. Then when you get to a point in life like we are now where it's like, I don't need that guy anymore.
Right.
He's still here, but I don't need him. I need a softer approach to everything. And again, it ties us back into that lull and autopilot mode, because everything we've done, for the last 39 years, mm-hmm. none of it matters.
Right.
Absolutely none of it matters. And to get myself out of that mentality is like this podcast, because of every hardship and tough road and mountain we've climbed and everything that we've gone through in our lives to this point now, because you and I live very different lives.
Right.
You were a high school honor roll guy. You went to college. You got degrees. You've worked hard, business owner. Successful marriage, everything else. And I'm the total opposite. Where it's like I barely passed high school, not because I'm an idiot,
right.
because I didn't care. Had to join the military, and from the military had to fight my way through that, and then no successful marriages, kids out the wazoo, and divorces and child support and all this other trash. And not that marriage or anything that's trash, that's a common term in the military, my bad. But when we get to this point in our life where we go, we struggled through all of that. We made it to mm-hmm. here. What's next? Because right. I've retired. I'm retired from the military, and I do law enforcement now because, number one, retirement's not enough. Thanks. Oh, that's terrible. I can't do politics. Yeah. My bad.
We're not doing politics.
So the retirement check's not enough to cover the lifestyle that I built for myself. Mm-hmm. I work because I enjoy this type of work. I enjoy helping people. What's next?
Right.
My grandfather had 5 retirements because the dude couldn't stop working.
Right. Well, I think so many times, like we run into, especially the mid-30s age group, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not linking it just to that age group, because you got guys who are in their 20s that experience it, guys that are in their 40s, 50s, on up, and we've talked, like there was read an article where this guy, he's 31 years old, he's a police officer, and he took his own life. He had a wife, he had 2 kids, 2 very young kids, and so all the innocence and the excitement that they bring. He was in Boy Scout, or he assisted with Boy Scouts.
Right.
I think he was a coach, and like all the things where like this guy's giving back. He's got his career, he's got a great family, and all this other stuff, and he takes his own life. And you're like, why? What brings him that? And then you follow up with, hey, there's another one where guy's 26 years old does the same thing, and we look at all the different guys that or not even just guys, but people that we've been there where, hey, they're getting carried out of the house.
Yeah.
And it's all across age groups. But what's
the catalyst?
What's the catalyst to go from from where they are now, where or from listeners now, where hey they're feeling numb, they're feeling hey things like they're broken.
Yeah.
They tell all their friends they're fine, but honestly they're broken. How do you make that jump, and how do you prevent that jump?
I think you got to figure out how to pull yourself out of the self-pity zone.
Yeah,
that's
one, and I think that's been the reason why we took the approach of, hey, you're not a victim.
No, you're not.
You're not a victim. You have to start picking up on what you've got going on in your life.
And I always go back to when you lost your job,
mm-hmm.
and it's one of the things that I love about the communication that we have. is there are things. These telemarketers are getting ridiculous today.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Epps? Where's Epps, Louisiana? Do you know?
I don't know. Anyway.
Exactly. That's how I know that's a telemarketer.
What you were saying.
So, when you went in and you told her,
mm-hmm.
and she found out that you lost your job,
right?
And she tells you, you take today, but tomorrow you get going
right.
and get yourself back in gear. And I use that now as when I have a setback, regardless of what it is. I'm going to take today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to self-pity it. I'm going to do what I got to do to mope about it. But tomorrow, I've got to do something. Because if we sit there, and that's a massive takeaway, especially at how old you guys were at that time,
right.
for her to say, hey, take today. But tomorrow, we need to adjust this, and we need to correct this issue so that we can continue on the path that we're on. You know, it's not a death in the family. It's not, something that you need to spend a long period of time mourning over. It's something you go, damn, and then move on from it.
Right.
And that's one of the things that dudes, we struggle with this. Well, the knowing when to suck it up and move on,
right.
and when to rip the Band-Aid off, rub the mud in it, whatever.
Well, I think a lot of it is we don't take and we don't process our emotions and our traumas. All right, and
no.
what I mean by that is, you talk to guys. Like we talked about in the very first episode, Welcome to the Shit Show. If you haven't watched that, go back and watch that.
Right.
But you talk to a bunch of the guys prior to doing this. Hey, if you do you need to talk to anybody or whatever your questions were with that. Nobody ever wants to pay for
therapy, right?
For therapy,
right?
And I get it because hey, we got money to throw, or we got to throw our money at bills or life expenses and things like that. And the thing that you run into is when you finally do start talking, it's like, okay, my life isn't that bad because you got Jimbo down the road takes and his wife left him or family member was in a car wreck or whatever and didn't make it or whatever. Like we judge our experiences on what everybody else has got going on. So we're like, okay, I'm better than this guy, but I'm not better than I'm somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And somehow that makes it seem like like we don't have to worry about what we've got going on, and so we push it down, and that's where you get the numb thing because you never learned how to process your feelings.
Right.
Well, at the same scenario, if I walk by and you got 6 people in a line and I poke them all with a pencil in their arm, and cause a little bit of an injury to them or whatever, the injury still happened. It doesn't matter how many times the other person got hit, you still have the injury there.
Right.
And so we take and we ignore things. You don't discuss it with anybody, and so it builds up, and that's what makes you numb. That's what makes it where you're like, okay, nobody cares. Well, nobody cares because you're not saying anything about it,
right?
Because you're not valuing the fact you've still got to process this, and so I think that's kind of the driving force there. That hey, we've got to break out of is is one, you're not a victim, but two, you got to find a way to acknowledge, hey, this is a problem area.
Right, the appropriate response to the trauma.
Right.
Your kid skins their knee, you need to go clean it and put a Band-Aid on it.
Right.
It's the same thing with things we go through.
Right. You can't ignore it.
Right, and this isn't just a first responder, law enforcement, military thing.
Mm-hmm.
There is a serious crisis in the world for men. We don't know how to address our traumas, our injuries, and we end up taking that trauma, allowing it to affect us negatively, and carrying it into every single relationship that we form, whether it's romantic, friend, associate, family member, whatever. We transfer all of that across the board because we've never stopped long enough to look in the mirror and go, I'm not okay.
Right.
And I need to reach out to somebody. And look, I'm a big proprietor of if you can't trust your circle, number one, you need a circle. But number two, seek that help. There are resources available for if your insurance won't cover mental health.
Mm-hmm.
They have through the state different resources for you to obtain mental health. I'm going to caveat that and say you're going to get what you pay for. Plain and simple.
Well, so yes and no. All right, and I get where you're going with that.
Right.
A lot of health insurance policies offer some type of coverage there too.
Right.
And so you got to do your vetting. You know, you got to find the right person. And I'm saying this from somebody who I've been to therapists that were great, or I've been to a therapist that's great. And I've been to therapists that were absolutely horrible that made me never want to talk to somebody else again.
110%.
So you've got both ends of the spectrum. In the same way, you've got a mechanic who's great. You got a mechanic who's horrible.
Yep.
We all know doctors. We know doctors who is like, if I break my arm, I do not want to go over here.
Yeah.
Got other ones where you're like, hey, no, I don't mind going. So in the same sense, you've got to do the vetting or whatever, and you don't want to go talk to a doctor who specializes in minor thing, or a psychiatrist who specializes in minor things when you got something major going on, and vice versa. So you got to do your vetting there, but if you can't afford it, there's still a lot of options. I think 988 doesn't charge you anything.
No, correct. And granted, that's a temporary, that's a Band-Aid.
Right.
Let's I mean, and I'm not knocking it at all. It's a great resource, but that's a Band-Aid until you can get help.
Right.
That's just you're not going to build a relationship there, and that's the biggest key thing that we're trying to get out here is that you've got to build trust in somebody, and the pets are okay. The dogs, the cats, and everything else.
Right.
Those are great. It's a great stress reliever. I can tell you right now, like the 30 seconds I pet that big dummy's floppy ears all over the place, it's a great release of emotion or whatever, because I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm petting this big floppy dog. At the same time, who's in heaven, by the way, because he's never allowed in this room. He's passed out on this road. Right. In the same breath, though, that you're putting Band-Aids on the problem, you have to find somebody that you can build a trusting relationship with, that you can open up that door, because we're always going to have things in the back of our mind, our deep, dark secret that we don't tell anybody. We're always going to have them. We're always going to have that piece of trauma that we don't release to anybody. There's nothing we can do about it. That's something that you've got to have utter trust to let that out the door. But you've got to let it off your chest. You cannot, no matter what society says, no matter what the stigmas say, no matter how long they've told us this, we are incapable of carrying the weight of the world. You might be able to get away for a while with it. You may be able to handle it for a while, but eventually that weight crushes you. Right. And we get to that point that we're 80, 90 years old. I don't plan to live that long, but some men get to that point where they're 80, 90 years old, and it's like you look back and you go, what have I wasted my life on when I should have been paying attention to the things that matter?
Push away?
Right.
Who did you push away? Because that, in the same sense where we're like, hey, look, you got this going on. There's nothing wrong with contacting a therapist and getting some help. And I'm a firm believer of using that, of using a therapist when you can. In the same breath, friends are every bit as much important and a requirement. And because as much as you may love your therapist, you can't call them all the time at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right. When you need that moment.
When you're sitting there and you're 2 Jack and Cokes in for the night, and all of a sudden the demons that you thought you had boxed away are like, hey man, what's going on?
Remember that time?
They're sitting on the couch with you, and you're like, I got nowhere to go but right here,
Right.
And you got to sit there and try to work through it. You've got to be able to have that friend who is going to answer that phone, and that's not an easy thing to do. In the same regards, where hey, you got to vet, different doctors and mechanics and all this other stuff. You've got to vet friends, or you got to vet people to say, hey, who's going to be that person for me?
Right.
And also you got to realize you may be that person for one of them.
That's
because again, we don't know what.
That's where I was going to go with
on
that.
Each other's brains.
If somebody's going to open that door for you and you're going to weigh on them, you've got to be able to reciprocate it and carry the weight for them every now and then. It's very similar to a romantic relationship in the sense that everybody always goes into it with, this is 50-50. No, it ain't.
Yeah.
It ain't. Because there's going to be times in your relationship and there's going to be times in your friendship where you're carrying the weight. You've got to know when to draw the line. We're not saying, be the weight carrier the whole time, because now you're carrying your world and their world. But be reciprocant of what's going on, but cognizant at the same time. Obviously, don't trust the guy who everybody at work knows is running around telling everybody. Don't trust the guy in the circle that sits here and drinks coffee with you, then goes across the street to your arch nemesis and sits and has coffee with him. You know what I mean? But at the same time, if we're not opening up these doors, we're slowly swallowing ourselves, and by the time it's too late. You've checked out because you just didn't take 2 seconds to open up a door, and we're gonna fail. It's a thing in life. We're gonna fail at something. We're gonna fail a lot, and I talk about it all the time. I suck at a lot of things. Being a dad, not one of them. Really good. I'm present. But I also know that I'm not present for every single one of my children. Mm-hmm. Not every single one of my children calls me when there's a problem. So I know, I'm not going to say I suck, but I definitely could do better.
Shortcomings.
Right. So look at that when you're looking for those avenues, because when we get into the lull where nothing's really wrong, I just feel broken, that's when you need to start looking for your way out. Right. Your light at the end of the tunnel. And not every friend that you have that's a lifeline in that moment. I know your face went confused when I said light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, we're not going that route.
We're not the checkout, the handout, the life preserver, the guy that gets tossed to you. All right, but understand that not every. Yeah, we're not getting canceled, not yet. Not every hand that comes out is going to be the same hand every time. There's going to be moments like with Mike here. If there's times where he's going to say, hey, John, you got a minute. And there's times he's going to say, hey, Luke, you got a minute. Because different problems have different solutions. Right. Sometimes you need a hammer, and sometimes you need a scalpel. And that's how you've got to approach your problems and know when to call for a hammer and when to call for a scalpel.
Right.
Also, if you don't know, I'm the hammer. Luke's the scalpel.
So, guys, I want to say thank y'all for taking a moment to listen to this podcast. I do want to stress, if you are experiencing any type of depressing thought or thoughts of wanting to harm yourself or somebody else, call 988.
Please.
We definitely do not want to get phone calls. We don't want to get those emails saying that a bad decision was made. We'd rather get emails from you at Coffee&theBull saying what's going on. If you don't like it, if you're like, hey, I don't like the way John talks, send us an email.
Why always me?
Coffee&theBull@yahoo.com. We'd love to hear from you.
If you don't like that Mike doesn't wear socks, because he's gross.
Yeah, I don't wear socks if I can help it.
That's valid. He doesn't. It's weird.
But guys, take a moment. If you haven't done so on all the platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify,
yes.
TikTok, Instagram. There, nearly everything out there we're on. Find us, hit those subscribe buttons. Let us know that you're following.
It's the best way for us to get it out there to maybe not necessarily you. Maybe everything in your life is going great right now, but you may have somebody in your circle of friends who's afraid to open up, and this may be a way for us to get out to them and let them know the biggest message of all is that you're not alone. That there's nothing that you're going to go through and nothing that you haven't gone through that either Mike or I haven't already experienced. And I'm going to tell you right now, you hit us up with coffeeandthebull@yahoo.com with whatever you're going through or whatever problem, concern you have. And I'll be honest with you, if there's a circumstance that you're going through that Mike hasn't experienced or I haven't experienced, we'll find the guy that has.
That can help out.
We will get him on to the show. If it's something you want to keep private, we'll get a conversation going. If you do reach out, Mike and I are on this 24/7. I'm not saying you're going to get a response 24/7 because we do sleep as much as we talk about not enough sleep. But we're going to get back to you. We love hearing from the people. The messages have started to pick up. So far, nothing but great feedback, which is disappointing because Mike wants a hater moment.
Yeah,
But all that being said, it's the goal is to make a difference somewhere. It's not millionaire status type things that we're going after. It's nothing like that. It's we're just trying to normalize that we're human beings and we have emotions, and not saying it's okay to boohoo cry in the middle of a gunfight, but at some point we gotta address the injury and treat it and get better so that we can be better for the people that we care about in our lives. So all that being said, Mike's gonna say his stupid catchphrase. I'm gonna call him stupid, and we're gonna see you guys later.
Toodaloo.
Stupid.